Hey everyone, Wine Sessions Podcast, episode number 4. And today's guest is a special guest, honestly, because we met. I attended a lecture he gave, like I think 4 or 5 years ago. That really blew my mind. And I sent him a message like a week or two ago. He replied super fast, which is kind of like the impression he left on me. Boris Smoje, a sales director from Greif for UK and Scandinavia. Boris, I'm really happy to have you here, and I appreciate taking the time on a Sunday morning.
Thank you, Vukashina, for that kind introduction. It's obviously very interesting, and thanks for having me.
Yeah. So, can you share a background? Like, how do you describe yourself? Give an intro to the audience.
Yeah, sure. I can give my background. My background is actually quite coming from very different, let's say, positions in my life. I've been studying molecular biology for many years, so I've been having a route in more academia world and more like institutions related to the science. Then I moved on into completely different direction at one point in my life, which is considering the business and business needs. Then I developed myself through either the private companies or the big corporates. And I ended up being in a very big organization dealing with industrial packaging, as you previously mentioned and introduced me as a sales director for UK Scandinavia.
Cool. I'm particularly interested in that mindset. So you finished the college that's not exactly related to sales, and then you kind of like ended up in industrial packaging. Can you share the origin story when you began in sales, and what were you thinking back then, and like a summary of the process that got you where you are today?
Yeah, sure. Obviously, I always found that some of your personal interests are kind of the things and the passion that drives you through your career or your private or professional life. It doesn't matter. But the point is that maintaining and keeping that passion is the key driver, or at least it was the key driver for me. In my particular instance, it was a bit different story, meaning just to correct you, I never finished the college. I never graduated the University of Belgrade, molecular biology, but I've been studying that for quite a few years.
Okay.
But then at one moment I had an opportunity to move and work in one very small private company, which is more like a startup company, which gave me an insight into the business, and basically I fell in love, and that's where I developed all my passion related to kind of the startup ideas and business ideas overall, not necessarily sales ideas. And from that point onwards, basically what I've done is just maintained and pushed my passion through the various organizations. So maybe it's an interesting fact, but for me, it certainly is that it doesn't matter if it is a big corporate or massive organization or it is a small private company and a startup, but certainly you can maintain that passion and pass that passion through, which I strongly believe will end up delivering the great value for whatever organization you work for.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like everything is really integrated, and you really fall in love with the process, not exactly the job or the title itself. It's the process, right?
Correct. It is the process, and it is certainly the scope of everything needs to be fit. Meaning, in your life, you're making those decisions for which company you would like to work for, which people you would like to have around. I was really lucky because I made my choices based on obviously the rational decisions or requirements and job description. That's all fine, but fundamentally you make also your decisions, what you want to do in your life with people you want to work with, or which kind of the organization it is. And I'm a big believer as well. There is a great importance of that story behind behind the companies, behind the people you work with. And these days, for example, I can give you the perfect parallel, I suppose, is the craft brewing industry. In the UK, okay. I'm living now in the UK with my family, and the craft brewers are popping up every day in every corner, and I suppose it's the same now even in Eastern Europe, in Serbia, Hungary, and neighboring countries. The whole story about the craft was interesting because they were brewing, and they're still brewing very interesting beer, and exactly. I fell in love with that industry, and that's all fine. But with such a variety of the products that is available at the moment on the market, every corner almost is having the private-owned brewery here in the UK. The point is that there is no anymore such a big difference between the products you're having on the market offered. Is that IPA produced here in Chester where I live, or it's in London? There is no big difference. The point is the story behind. These all small companies are having their own story. And that story is what interested me, as a consumer, for example. I'm kind of interested to hear and listen the story how they came to the beer. What's their driver? Which kind of people are working in that small organization or in that organization? So all those things are kind of super important for me, and I suppose those things should be evaluated when you make your rational decisions. What do you want to do in your life?
Yeah, I 100%. So it's good intro for the next question. Meaning having years and years of experience in sales and really sales and marketing, it's essentially the same thing. So how do you see sales today in relation to all the innovations that are available to us? How does that affect your job, and how do you adjust to the trends? Meaning the time factor is really crucial today. We have this all on-demand economy. Are sales different from what you've been used to back in the day, or because things are shifting so fast? How do you stay agile?
Well, that's a very good question. Meaning, this is, as a matter of fact, this is a training I'm doing next week with my team across the Europe, particularly. But it's an interesting question if we dissect it a bit, which is which type of the sales. It's even more important because I have actually a counter question for you. What do you think, Vukan? How many universities you think in the UK are having the course that you can graduate as a sales course?
I have no idea. I mean, I would have to guess, but I have no idea. Really?
Let's do so. Guess.
I don't know, like 50?
Like one, right?
One.
Yeah, exactly. There are no, you can't go on the university and just go for a sales course. It doesn't exist. Yeah, general management, it does. Marketing, it does.
Yeah.
How many do you think universities are offering any kind of the procurement course or supply chain, supply and demand course?
Honestly, I think none.
I believe between 85 and 90.
Really?
So my point here is that basically the sales as a discipline, the sales as a function is lacking kind of development. And to answer your initial question is, yes, I believe that sales has so much potential to develop going forward in the future, but it requires proper training and developing people, working with them to get the innovations and the new technologies implemented into the sales. Particularly, I will focus on B2B because B2B sales is more difficult. B2C, you have all kind of the courses and all kind of the trainings that can help you out. And of course, it is, let's say, more popular. But B2B world is completely, let's say, ignored or have been ignored for so many years. So I believe that when you're saying being agile and innovations, there are so many things, meaning starting with the tools, but also the mindset of the people. The lean startups are implementing so many things that big corporates simply haven't been able to implement for so many years. But I'm a big believer that things are changing, and that agile, lean kind of an attitude is becoming super important in big corporates, equally the same.
Yeah, that's really interesting what you said about universities, because I saw the digression of classic modules, like you said, supply chain and I mean around me, and when I was looking for master studies, and I saw an increase in IT marketing, digital marketing, and combinations there, more focused on entrepreneurship, more focused on startups, that lean world. But I think universities are in a big, they are losing that race because they don't, they are not fast. They teach something that's not really useful when you go out and actually do the work. At least that's for me.
Well, this is very different. Let's say different perspective that you can get from different environments. Meaning, I can't 100% agree with you simply because I believe that unis, particularly depends which unis, but unis in general, at least here in the UK, are offering really contemporary courses that I believe are suitable for the environment we are working in, and the UK is a very regulated environment. And if you think about the startup scene, obviously UK is probably one of the biggest in the world as a startup generator. London is a massive hub for the startups, and everyone knows that, either technology or any kind of other industry that we're having today. But my point is that sales as a discipline within either startup or corporate being neglected for so many years, and there are so much more potentials to develop the people to apply either do these new tools or approaches or techniques But as I said, yeah, it is very challenged. And again, coming back to your original question, I believe that there is a lot of innovations that we can apply from either, as I said, from the startup companies or from the big corporates applying these new techniques that can be rolled out to many companies. And yeah, I think that there is a bright future, but it needs to be addressed.
Yeah, moving to like the other side of the story. So customers, people. I'm more of like a creative guy. I create content and do all that marketing stuff. So people are overwhelmed with information today, and I think on a daily, it's not exactly a daily basis anymore. It's like an hour basis. The amount of content and the amount of messages customers receive is enormous. And how do you? I'm really interested what you think here. So how do you deliver the message and grab customers' attention in such a noisy and fast-paced world?
Well, you're not having much time to do that. Obviously, you're having extremely limited time these days to grab that attention. Meaning, probably 5 seconds to gain your attention and keep you on the certain website. So that time is very limited with any buyer or any peer at the customer organization that you are talking to. So you really need to prepare and maintain the focus of the customer. But fundamentally, behind everything is, I strongly believe, a preparation. Because there is only one thing you need to identify, and then you are having an attention, which is identifying the need and potential implication for the customer. Is that the personal need, or is that the company need, the business need? It doesn't matter. The point is identifying a need. And that need obviously will lead you to the certain implication, and that implication will certainly lead you to the more successful conclusion or closing the proposal. So I don't believe that we as a businesses, we as professionals, the people, the sales forces are spending too much time preparing that. And I have to say, this is not down to a single individual. This is not down to salespeople saying, okay, now you need to do the research. The whole mentality, the whole organization needs to support that type of the approach, which means that you're having the resources throughout the different functions, including the marketing departments, that should prepare that type of the brief for the people being able to successfully identify the needs and implication and finally close the business. But that is the thing. You're not having much time with the people these days because, as you rightly said, the information is widely available, and you really need to use it smart. And using smart means, as I said, identifying really the need and, even more important, potential implications.
You mentioned while you were answering the question, so a team working as a unit, sort of like a basketball team where there are different positions, and you have a game plan, and you play. And meaning, like, in the world where sales and marketing are always being kind of like components, even today, I really had enough of that story, and I don't like that comparison. But I'm interested in how do you see sales and branding, because the mentality and the game there are different, but they should be closely tied together because they help one another. So how do you see sales and branding? What's your mindset on it?
Well, I suppose meaning the first thing that is on my mind is that brand needs to be reliable, right? The brand needs to represent the true value of either the product or a service you're proposing. If that doesn't stand, then everything else falls apart, right? It doesn't make sense. So first thing is it's like your USP, meaning it's like your unique sales proposition. The brand needs to be the firm and fair and true. And if brand is not set like that, then everything else is very difficult. So it starts with company, actually, again, like cross-functional business, being able to identify that brand and stand behind that brand. And if that is the correct, whatever you're doing, are you providing the best possible service in the market, or you're providing a certain best product, or you're claiming that you're having the best product, then that brand needs to stand. So I suppose the brand is one of the biggest tools for the sales. Obviously, if you're having a good brand, as I said, that will be resonating as a unique sales proposition, and it's much easier for the salespeople to rely on that brand, and it is supporting the whole sales cycle, I suppose.
It's like a Superman suit to your Clark Kent, right?
Yeah, kind of.
My problem with whenever there's a discussion between sales and branding, and on the meetings with sales, it's people set the wrong expectations. Meaning that sometimes you put sales expectations into branding strategy, and branding people don't exactly set the right expectations in the beginning from sales. and then there's that friction because people get lost. It's essentially, yeah, it's whole a system and everything needs to work as one, but the expectations in the beginning and what you want to accomplish is completely different. And in branding there's more patience, right? There's more because everything's on social media and it's not exactly ROI driven in the short term.
Yeah, of course, but meaning once again, the branding for me, let's simplify this. The branding for me is what the company, what the business, what everyone as an individual within that company stands for. And the branding for me is a purely tool. The sale is a consequence. The sale is a consequence of that branding. If the branding is wrong, then there is no reason promoting branding. Meaning these days you're having the businesses that are not relying on branding at all.
Exactly.
But at the same time you're having businesses that find it fundamental. So from my perspective, you're absolutely right. I think that it should be working seamless. It should be working hand in hand. It can't be separated. But as I said, I think that the branding is coming as let's say necessity if you want to rely your sales, or if you want to develop your business based on the brand, then you really need to stand behind that. And this is the cross-functional discipline. For example, I can give you an example in a B2B world where I spend most of my time in professional career so far. It is the brand is very difficult to sell because the products are in B2B world sometimes even considered as a commodity. Yeah. But the point is that it is not about the brand, the name. It is about the service. It is about the value that you create. It is about everything else. It is about your supply chain. It's about your quality, and that is what is brand for me. It is a cross-functional discipline where you pull all the organization together towards, as you said, strategical goal. But the point is that it needs to work all together to be able to stand in front of the customer and saying, your bold statement, I'm providing the best service or we're having the best quality. It's easy to say, but it's much more difficult to deliver.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. Moving to your field of being in industrial packaging, I'm intrigued to hear what you think on. You mentioned that in the beginning, so customer trends and preferences these days. You mentioned craft beer. You mentioned there's like localization. There's like a lot of obsession with different tastes. I'm interested, like what trends nowadays are more like most interesting to you? What patterns have you been able to notice by observing to your and listening to your market?
Well, in industrial packaging, meaning I've been working in industrial packaging in various parts of industrial packaging, if you want. But what particularly was always interesting for me was looking actually step ahead. So I was looking beyond our initial, let's say, the first year of sales. I was always looking to the consumer's world. What they use that packaging for, where this packaging ends up, which kind of the product is going to use for, and that's where the story is becoming even more interesting. When I was working in a world of beverage cans, for example, there are so many brands that you use, either the big brands, world famous brands, or you're working, as you mentioned, private, small, individual craft brewers. Every single product has its own story, and developing that story and working with the people to make it happen is something that, for example, delivered amazing satisfaction to me, and that's what I was driven by. In industrial packaging, it's equally the same. We are selling industrial packaging across various massive industries, but also smaller companies here in the UK or globally. It doesn't matter. But the point is, every single product has its own story, and it's all about the passion. As you rightly say, you can't invent the wheel in a certain in a circumstances where you're having that information is widely available. People are having that information, but that's what I'm saying. I'm coming back to my previous answer, I suppose, where I said that looking for a needs and implication of either your customer or certain professional within that organization, or it's a critical. It's a critical. You really need to focus to identify why you, why not somebody else. Meaning, it's a world where the competition is amazing. It's horrendous number of companies offering the similar service. How you distinctive yourselves, how you make that proposition being very unique. it's the world where we really need to focus as an organizations to establish and make sure that we identify those needs. So all in all, for me, the sales was always looking beyond just selling the product, beyond that transactional information, because actually the more interesting for me was always the next step. What is that product used for, where it ends up in this world, because by default that product on its own has own story, I suppose.
And what about the B2B market, essentially, because you're in one, and I'm also in a company I work with. It's a B2B market. So, what are some key factors, in your opinion, that influence the buying decisions? Okay, we said reliability of the brand and all this stuff, but going into the more practical level and having online and offline channels as our as options, what are some key factors that influence B2B customers? On a more practical level, let's say?
Well, in a packaging world, in the packaging industry, which I can comment on because that's again where I spend most of my professional life, is certainly there are factors, and it really depends on the company you're dealing with. So if it is a global player, for example, in the market, then usually the main values are related to your portfolio, your footprint, the contingencies of supply. Can you the reliability behind the supply, and of course quality. These are the biggest criteria. So even more precise, if some plant failed to deliver from point X, are you going to be able to deliver from point Y? For such a massive systems, the big companies in the world, one of the most important factors is making sure that you can reliably supply the product, right? Day in, day out, because that's what their production is all about. But then if you're working with the smaller companies, then those criteria are changing, and they're more about your flexibility and capability to deliver something unique, innovative. So unfortunately, these days that shifts from one point to another. It's not like that you can set the standards and play by that standard. It is a new world, brand new world, and the companies and the customers are changing. And your portfolio of the customers is continuously changing, so you really need to adapt.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. It's B2Bs. They have a saying that in every B there's a C, but it's really different. And depending on the industry, you kind of like need more patience when dealing with that certain audience. A topic that you mentioned at the beginning that's like super interesting to everybody, and I'm gonna give you some context the way I see it as a young marketeer, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. So smaller companies and I would say small and medium-sized companies began releasing years ago, depending on the market, different tastes, and localization kind of took a gear shift back in the day. And after that, when the popularity seemed to be rising, bigger companies started extending their product lines, doing a whole bunch of different tastes, different packaging. There's like especially even in Serbia, there's like one drink like guarana or water or even like beer. There's like a ton of different tastes, and localization and that taste differentiation is extremely popular. We have it with craft beers. I can vouch for the wine world. There's like a ton of wines we never ever heard of in smaller cities of Serbia. It's really super fun world with all these different flavors. And the kind of that's interesting to me is that smaller companies that are doing all this work can now, thanks to internet, who's now the middleman, are in a good position to own their faith. Like David against Goliath looks really good. What is your 2 cents on everything that's been going on in localization and buying local products? Is there any difference you see, like in different markets or something like that?
Well, I suppose meaning this is the right question where I'm going to bring the craft beer industry once again, because it's a perfect reflection of what you were just describing. The craft beer scene started as a local one, but these days, obviously, when you were saying, winning the game, let's be also honest, if craft beer is not about the massive production. Craft beer is about the taste and the local thing and having the local story. I was working with the companies that were never being keen on the export, for example, of the business, but they were being keen to serve the, 2-3 quarters in London, and that's it. They don't have a different aspiration. That's it. which I admire, to be completely honest. But at the same time, that story being developed on the craft beer scene throughout, that, big organizations were acquiring small. So literally every day, you can hear about the acquisitions. ABI acquired the Camden Brewery in London, which is the craft brewery, or you're having, the Carlsberg in a deal with Brooklyn Lager. My point is that, that's inevitable, meaning, it's all about innovations, right? Meaning in whatever world you have seen that throughout any industry, that, if you're innovating, of course, you're going to be on that list. But in general, I think localization, yeah, that's fine. But I'm a big fan of innovation in either in product or even service. It doesn't matter. The point is that, you can innovate throughout, and it shouldn't be elitistic or, only for even the startups. Bear in mind that a lot of big organizations, the corporates, adopted, that mindset in their organizations and holistically implement it through, which gives them the competitive advantage, not just that they have the capital to finance and support, but also now they have that mentality in a lean startup approach. So all in all, I think that you're right. I think that localization is the trend that is very popular, and that's popping up with all kinds of the startups. In the UK, you're having, in beverage industry, for example, the cold brew coffee scene, which is the new scene we can debate, or as you rightly said, the water scene. Yeah, of course, that is obviously trying to identify the relevant niche in order to satisfy the customers or consumers fundamentally. But the point is, the big players are understanding the game, and obviously, they want to be part of that game as well. How they do it is that they adopt their business model to fit that, or they are simply acquiring the companies that are capable of doing that. That's real life we're living in.
Yeah, I know that Serbia is not exactly the brilliant example on a worldwide basis, but what's the thing with smaller brands? You said that they have aspirations to own neighborhoods and don't want to expand worldwide, which is fine, and I see a big opportunity in branding there, because when you have something that's limited, that's not exactly available everywhere you go, it makes it more special to me as a consumer, as a customer, when I go. So, for example, I had a conversation with a guy who works in sales in a wine company, and he said there's like a ton of small companies that whenever you go to a smaller city, there's a local winery there. And I'm thinking, if they realized how big an opportunity branding is, even though they don't want to expand to some enormous level, that's perfectly fine. They can use kind of more affordable, more cheaper options to do the branding and make it more fun to customers, because there's like a lot of smaller brands, even a craft brewery here. They don't have a presence, and you can only hear a company my friend works at. They don't have online presence, and you can only hear about them if you are lucky to stumble upon them or you word of mouth, right?
I'm with you, but I as much as I respect and do respect that, though, of course, you need to be in the position that you are, let's say, capable of not relying or not pushing for an export or extra sales or expanding your business. This is not an easy to achieve, right? Coming into that position for any business, because by default, when your business starts expanding, then you would expect that you invest further on in the business to develop it further on. My point is that what you just mentioned is that really what your brand is about. If it is not about the product, then it is, I suppose, about the story behind the company, about those people that are working there, and that's what you're saying. So from that perspective, I think that you can use branding, which in a certain industries, you mentioned the wine or the craft brewery industry, it helps because it tells the story. One of the perfect example, which I would always put as a case, just look into the Beavertown Brewery from London. This is the perfect case of the guy called Nick Dwyer. He's I believe, artistic director of the Beavertown Brewery. Amazing guy that developed the whole story behind the Beavertown Brewery, one of the worldwide famous now, but most famous in London. And just use this case. Take a look.
Yeah, we'll do. Yeah, I mean, I cannot vouch statistically, like there's a big stat, but whenever I'm somewhere, like I recently went to Berlin, 2 months or 3 months ago, I was in Italy, and I always, and my friends too, they go to a small wine shop or or a local brewery or any local shop, and they ask like, what's the best product you guys use locally here? And I think that's what makes me think, oh shit, like there's a big opportunity there in relation to what we just said about branding and stuff. So I don't know, like I would be thrilled to see like smaller companies sharing their story, because they really can do, and that can be really powerful.
I suppose that meaning, I think that you're right, and fundamentally, in the environment, not necessarily that it needs to be even the commercialized, in a
yeah, it doesn't have to be.
I also respect you're having, what do we call house wine? You go on Croatian islands and you can drink absolutely brilliant house wine or table wine without having any brand or any label on it. So
yeah, it's the experience. It's the experience. It's always the experience.
Yeah. Correct.
Yeah. Are you a wine guy? Since we're calling this podcast Wine Sessions.
That's an excellent question. I moved towards the beer guy since I moved into the UK. As you can imagine, the selection of wine is brilliant, but there are not many wineries around the UK. So, but there are craft brewers every corner. So, I've been a big wine guy when I was back in Belgrade, and obviously exploring the different regions. But I kind of moving into the UK moved into, I suppose, what is most presented here, which is beer.
What are your favorites?
I will only tell you one, which is my favorite wine all in the world, and I can also tell you the beer one. But the wine is Vino Nobile di Montepulciano.
Okay.
That is absolutely my favorite one. Sorry?
Interesting choice.
Yes, I've been really happy when was that? Probably 10 years ago. I had a really good chance to explore the Tuscany region and the vineyards in the Tuscany region, but came out of that really enlightening trip with set flavor, and my wine is definitely Vino Nobile. And I think that it is wine that is not present everywhere these days, particularly, for example, in the UK, it's not the most popular wine. It's kind of super expensive here, which is very weird. Mm-hmm. But it's my wine choice. My wine of choice, yeah.
Cool. Final thought for the end. We have this thing where we ask more like a Gary Vee kind of thing, where you ask a guest to ask a question for the end. This really can be anything. It can be a question for the people listening. It can be your thought. It can be something you want to know, and we're gonna see what people think about it. So anything that's on your mind recently that you want to share?
Well, I want to rewind basically when you and I first met, right? You mentioned that lecturing that I did years ago back in Belgrade, and I would like to rewind back and basically put my question, because I see your initiative and all this interview that we are doing at the moment, which is, I believe, a brilliant idea. But I would like actually to gauge your story, and I would like to gauge how you see that particular market, because my lecture was all about the startups and the lean startups. So my question to you would be, what do you believe that it was developing, happening in the last 7-8 years since we met?
I mean, to a certain degree, yes. I cannot really I don't want to offend everyone by saying no, but there are people and companies that adopt that mindset, but I think they adopt it in short term, because in long term you experience the whole 9 yards of problems that a startup, for example, has. Because when you decide that you want to innovate something, it takes a lot of mistakes that you need to learn to double down. It takes a lot of resources, and it takes time and patience is something I'm teaching myself there. And I think more and more companies, they wanna innovate. There are companies that innovate for sure, and there are a bunch of startups here in Serbia that are doing some really cool things. But due to the whole experience and the whole effort that it takes, I think people get lost in somewhere in the middle. They simply don't give it enough time, and they quit at some point, and they don't believe that some tools are really useful to help them bring that innovation to the market, because I think ideation is fine. I think execution can be way better. That's my 2 cents.
Right. That's that sounds really good. Well, I wish a lot of success to you and as well to your team. And as I hope to see being more agile all around the market in the UK. And in Serbia, yeah.
Yeah, for sure, Boris. Thank you so much. I think this was a fun talk. I wish you a lot of success and that you crush it in the job you're currently at, and to go back to the wine. Keep drinking craft beers, but go back to the wine.
Don't worry, I'm just exploring the latest
I'm kidding.
regions which I didn't have much more opportunities, but believe me, coming back, Italy rules. So
yeah, joking. If we ever meet in Italy or you end up in Serbia, send a message. We can wine together.
We'll certainly do. Thanks for the question.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Boris. Thanks. Bye.
Cheers. Bye now.